All right, next morning I'm less tired and I can make a bit of noise. And I've got the amp connected to a variac set to 110, and I've got my current limiter on for initial power up. The owner's been playing this, so I know it's probably safe, but just in case, I've got the current limiter. And that old speaker, I can see problems and bad glue patches in the cone, so I don't expect it to sound particularly great, but it should be safe to power on. And I want to see what the wall voltage 110 correlates to with the heaters, and see if this amp can be used with 120 mains or whether it needs to have a variac or other voltage regulator, giving it only 110. And I want to know before I order parts what kinds of resistors I'm going to need for the new bias. It's powered on. Let's see what the heaters are at. Let's check here at the output tube heater connections. 6.59. So at the 110 volts, it's at 6.59. Actually, it's a little bit less than 110 volts because I've got the current limiter on for the initial power up. It's actually at 109.3 volts. Now that I know it's not going to blow up, let me turn off the current limiter. 111.1. I've got an old school variac like you'd find from the Doc Brown's lab or something. It doesn't turn very smoothly, but it's much better built than the ones I see on the market today. So with 110.3 volts, which is close enough, the heaters are at 5.59 still. So I know that we definitely don't want to run this amp with modern wall voltages. They'd be crazy hot and you have short tube life. I'll talk to the owner about that. Let's see if we have voltage across the cathode resistor on the output tube, and if so, what it is. Good news is I'm not hearing any hum. 6.28 volts DC across that. And let's check plate to cathode on that tube, 232.4, which means that this EL84 is idling at 8.61 watts. It tells me that resistor is probably drifted up a bit. Let's see, it measured 161, probably was originally 120 or 150. I've got the schematic to my right, but it's closed. I'll look at that in a little bit. But means that the amp will sound even better when I dial that in. But I can't dial that in until I talk to the owner about variacs and such. Let's plug in and see what it sounds like. Now, the AC4 and the AC10 have the 1 meg grid leak after the grid stopper / gain mixer resistors, which means that there's a voltage divider there that's not there on the 30 and the 15. They were intentionally making sure the AC4 and the AC15 had AC4 and AC10 had lower gain than the AC15, so there wasn't a lot of chance of them outcompeting each other. Well, I'll tell you right now, that's really low gain for even a single-ended one EL84 amp. It's got an EF86 in there, which should be quite a bit louder than this. That speaker's about to die. So I back off on the volume. Make sure I'm in the low. All right, so those jacks are not shunting to ground, as they should. I'll clean those off. Let me look at the schematic real quick. I'm not hearing any difference between those two. They may not have them wired as a high gain and a low gain. I've never had a 64 AC4 in before. I've had some AC10s, but there are only 3,000 of these made. I'm not sure how many of them made it across the pond. The input jacks are not wired to shunt to ground, and they are not wired as different levels of gain. So on each one of them, you got a 100K resistor, then with a 1 meg resistor to ground, which means you always have a voltage divider. That's like turning your guitar knob on your guitar from 10 to about 8.5 or 9 and not turning it up ever. It's not a huge difference, but I'll let you hear. Here's 10. Here's just below 9. That's the same voltage divider ratio that they've built into this just to keep it from being loud, which I don't think is very nice of them. And that thing where they don't shunt it to ground was just to save a few P on which jack they use and a bit of wire going to the ground. So that could easily be changed out, but that's the owner's call. This jack doesn't have the shunting connection on the other side, which is a shame, but it would be nice. They were definitely making this a budget model. Let's see if the tremolo works now that I moved that wire last night. It does. So you have variable speed, fixed depth. Doesn't sound very good, but I suspect that's failing cathode bypass caps. And that could also be why the main channel's got a loss of gain. Pretty sure this speaker is a Goodman Auditorium 8-inch Alnico, as in auditorium, as in something for your vice principal to say, well, Mrs. Jensen, please come to the office. So it's not the best 8-inch speaker ever made. I'll call my speaker guru, Dave Halford, and ask him if he thinks this speaker is worth reconing. If not, there are a lot of good sounding Alnico choices on the market, or if the client prefers ceramic, though I would go with Alnico for this. Let's see, does it have the speaker? It just says 8-inch speaker, 3 ohms in this Vox book. Let's see. All right, in the service manual book, it doesn't go too in depth about the AC4. It gives the schematics and a little bit of information. It just says 8-inch, 3 ohm speaker. Then it instantly goes to dating a Vox AC30. Don't need to read that. They like chocolate and flowers. All right, so I know what to order. So dual 32, that's an 8. I can put a 10. Those are all 25 microfarads. I won't be using the little blue Vichys I prefer to use in this amp. I might go up to the next series of Vichy. They've got different levels. I'm going to either use the next level up of Vichy for these caps, or I'm going to use the Sprague Atom 50 volts, not the 25 volts, because they have formed the relatively thick leads of these old cathode bypass caps to do this kind of structural support, and then they have a resistor piggybacked off of it. And my preferred cathode bypass caps, little Vichys I use all the time, their leads are a little bit thinner, and I don't think we get the same structural support. I know the larger Vichy series, which is about this size, and the Sprague, sorry, but I always want to say Sprague, it sounds more refined. The Sprague caps and the 50 volts also have the sturdier leads and about the same size, so they're larger in diameter. These are the considerations that we have. But it's a simple amp, and the only issue with this, like any true point-to-point thing here, is I've, like on this one right here, I only move this out of the way so you can hear it. This cap goes from pin 3 to this bus bar, and it's wrapped around this bus bar right next to a bunch of other stuff. And then this resistor is piggybacked onto that cap here, and then piggyback to the cap here. When possible, I want to reuse the original resistor, and this kind of construction just makes it a little more time consuming. So a lot of simple stuff that will be painstaking in the execution, but worth it. Now I know more about the condition of the amp and this and all. We call my speaker guy, then we call the owner and see where we're at. Next up, for the same owner, he brought me this TBX era Korg. They're all made by Korg, but these were the UK Korg AC15s. He wanted to know if I could make any improvements on it. And I said, to a degree. The various series of AC15s and AC30s they've had over the years have had some very different approaches. And so the AC30 TBX is a pretty good amp once you remove the hideous factory ground loops and other dumb decisions they made as far as how the board was laid out. The AC15 from the same era, it's not as good an amp. I'll show you that. The Custom Classic series, the 30, was quite good, though the plate resistors for the first two stages were making it a little bit too fendery, along with a few other little things. The 15 was not so great. On the custom series and the hand-wired series, the two amps are pretty much the same amp, just with different output sections and transformers as a result. 15 watts have two EL84s, 30 have four. Some have effects loops, some don't, minor variations. But the core amp for the custom or the hand-wired 15 is the same as the core amp for the 30. That was not the case on these older ones. So let's go in here and see what I can and cannot do. I mean, I can do anything. The issue is budget and whether it's worth it for a particular amp. Under the hood, this is not like any of the other Voxes ever made. In fact, you will notice if you have done this a while that this is very much like the JCM 2000s from the same era, with these awful chassis quick connects. Hughes and Kettner does those too. It's a horrible way to do grounds, but the entire amp is done that way. It's got a reverb circuit added to it. Let's see how it sounds. Someone has changed out this cap before. They used an axial and forced it where a radial ought to go. That may have just been time and parts availability. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it's not a very good quality cap that's in there. So I will look at that. Let me get the schematic called up for this before I blather on too much more. When you've been doing this a while, you can look at a schematic, and while you don't know how an amp sounds, you know how an amp has the potential to sound. I mean, I can look at the schematic of a great amp and say, that has the potential to sound great. And then some idiot tries to build one and it's all full of mistakes and it won't sound great. So it's the schematic, the build, the execution, all these things together. This has a schematic that will not sound great in stock form. First of all, both the plate and cathode resistor for V1A are wrong for a Vox sound. It's going to have too much gain, not enough compression, if that makes sense. It's going to be a very clean gain. It's very fendery. And after that, it goes to a cold bias gain stage, which does a split that feeds the reverb circuit, plate-loaded split, like you find in a Fender. Then it has a fairly Fender-esque reverb mixer, and then it goes to a cathode follower stage, which is not too dissimilar to what you'd find in a real Vox. And then that feeds a tone stack, which uses the wrong taper pots, and has the mids resistor connected incorrectly. It's not the JMI circuit. And they, quote, improved it in such a way that it doesn't sound as interesting as the old tone stack, in my opinion. But, I've played an awful lot of Voxes, let's just say that. And after that, it goes to a fairly standard Voxy phase inverter. And then it goes, got a crossline master volume, and it has a bias tremolo. And crucially, where the big brother AC30 from the TBX series and all the real Vox AC15s and AC30s had a 250 or 220K pot in series with the 4.7 nanofarad cap for the cut circuit. This just uses a 220K resistor. So it's like having the cut circuit in the amp, but always at the brightest setting. And the AC15 Custom Classic does the same thing. The Custom series, the hand-wired series, they give you an actual pot. So one of the things I like to do on this and the Custom Classic is I change that R47, that 220K, to something that's going to sound a lot nicer. And you can put in a pot, you can experiment. Usually 47 to 68K is a nice range to be in. You still have plenty of highs, but it takes away all the ice pick. And I'll talk to the owner about that. This has got an Alnico blue. And so if I play into this very bright Fender pre-stage, then to a very cold biased second stage, then a Fender reverb mixer, and then a tone stack which has the mids wrong and the taper of the pots are wrong. And then with that nasty 220K mega bright fake cut circuit, and then into this Alnico blue, this amp's going to be really thin and bright. People are going to say, oh, Voxes are thin and bright. Anyway, let's see what it does sound like. Enough of me telling you what to expect. Let's see what it actually sounds like. It may sound like a nice little amp, but it's kind of should sound, according to my calculations, like a cathode biased mega bright deluxe reverb. Hopefully you can hear that. There's a hum and a buzz. I suspect filter caps given that this one was changed out. I imagine this one should have been at the same time, and both of them replaced better. See this 5 watt 270 ohm resistor here? Real physically close to these two capacitors. That gets hot. And when that gets hot, the temperature of these capacitors rise. This one's rated for 85 degrees Celsius. I imagine this one is as well. And this resistor rather here is just baking them, and probably gets up to around 85 degrees or higher. Shortens those the lives of those caps. And generally I'd want to replace all these other electrolytics in here, at which point this amp would sound better than new and would probably not need service for another 15 or 20 years. And this resistor here, which is poorly placed on the board, I would probably move that to a chassis mounted resistor over here where the heat's going to be away from the capacitors. But all that costs money, and how much money do you want to put into an amp like this? You know, that's the client's call. I don't know what the market value of these are. It's hard to keep up with the market values these days. Everything keeps going up in price crazily. So the things that I thought cost $500 cost $900. It's one of the reasons in the amps under $500 video, I started off by going to Reverb, because it gives me a cross-section of what the actual prices are used and new. Because I don't shop for amps very often. I've always got amps here to play through in various states of repair. I got some flack from that, for people like, why did you go to Reverb, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, absolutely support local business. Most music stores have things on Reverb. You can find a small town brick and mortar store through there and do business with them. Anyway, I'm getting off subject. So this thing's got a hum and buzz that it should not have. That's fixable. That is probably the root cause. That's fixable. Let's see what it sounds like. Pot needs to be cleaned. Let's start with what should be a pretty clean sound. These are the wrong taper pots, so I need to experiment to see where they're going to actually sound right. Got the treble down quite a bit compared to where it would be in a real AC15, even though the old clock position is different. It's a 1 meg pot rather than an audio, so. Sounds really sick. So this is not even a good example of what the schematic wanted to sound like. Very bright reverb because it's before the tone stack. And listen to this. That's oscillation. That's big oscillation. So something's amiss in that reverb circuit. Could be just the tubes, but I suspect it's the filter caps involved. So let's keep the reverb off, see if the tremolo is trembling. All that needs to be cleaned. And the master volume, simple cross line. So, what will it cost to fix this? One of the things I need to talk to the owner about is that for me to even spend the time to get a bill of materials together is an hour of labor. You know, just the way it is. I've got to see what parts are needed, where they're in stock, who's got them. Right now, vendors may have everything but this one cap, so I've got to go to another vendor for that. And I need to pull this speaker board out because there's a cap here that seems to be mounted to this board that's really close to here. There's a whole bunch of little things that can go wrong in this, and there's more investigation that needs to happen before I can even give him a quote. But I would need to go ahead with a commitment to maybe 3 hours of labor before I even get started, and that's just the reality. So whether that's worth it to him or not is up to him. The build quality of these is not fantastic. It's about the same as you get in a JCM 2000 of this era, and it's very similar to the overall build of the the AC15 Custom Classic. I think the Custom Classic's actually better built than this. But, you know, people pay crazy prices for the last UK Voxes. I don't get it. I mean, I love the UK, don't get me wrong, but this is not an Aston Martin. It doesn't even have a passenger ejection seat.